This video is Understanding Motion Graphics. In this video, you will learn the basics of what are considered motion graphics, and you'll get a detailed breakdown of some of the technical settings you'll need to understand when working with video. After Effects is primarily a post-production tool used to create motion graphics and effects. It's also used for layering or compositing video together. Some examples of motion graphics include animated TV show opening titles, film credits, as well as lower third graphics often associated with the news. Before creating motion graphics, it's important to go over some of the characteristics of video that will have an impact on your projects. Let's start by taking a look at some of the technical settings that you'll need to understand. With After Effects open, we'll use a new composition to examine some of these settings. Go to the Composition menu and choose New Composition. Compositions are what you use to assemble your audio, video, and graphics together into the final project you're creating. We'll get into them a bit further in another video. For now, let's examine the settings in the window. Let's start with the presets. The presets will help you determine things like the size of your video, as well as the format the video was originally shot on. NTSC and PAL are both broadcast standards for television as well as DVD. NTSC is the standard used in the United States, while PAL is the video standard for Europe and other areas of the world. These presets are considered standard definition video presets as opposed to high definition video. Standard definition video has been largely phased out in favor of high definition. Speaking of which, you'll notice a range of high def presets to choose from as you move further down the list. You also see some numbers associated with some of these presets. The numbers reflect characteristics of video such as the screen size and frame rate, which is something we're leading up to. At the bottom of the list are presets with regard to film projects. As far as which one you should choose, that ultimately depends on how you shot your video in the first place. You'll need to take a look at your camera settings to determine how the video was shot and which preset you should choose. The next area of the window reflects the size of the video, which will be determined by the preset that you choose. You will rarely enter custom sizes here unless you're working on a project that ventures out of the normal standards that are associated with video production. Pixel aspect ratio sets the size and shape of the pixels in your video. Some video formats use rectangular pixels that will vary in size. The preset you choose will ultimately establish which of these options is the best fit. One thing to take note of is that if your video ever looks stretched or squeezed, it's probably because there's a mismatch in the pixel aspect video settings. It's probably because there's a mismatch in the pixel aspect ratio settings. Frame rate is how time is measured with regard to video. Video is measured in frames per second or FPS. The higher the frame rate, the higher the quality and clarity of your video. The most common frame rates are 29.97 and 24 frames per second, which is commonly associated with films or movies. Resolution will establish how the video is previewed in terms of quality during playback. You can leave this at full for now, as we can adjust this later as needed during previews. Timecode is the display we use to measure time with regard to video. In terms of understanding how to read timecode, it reads left to right as hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Watch out for that last column of numbers on the right, as it can confuse people new to video. Remember that the last column on the right is frames, so that last column of numbers will hint to being a frame measurement. For example, if your project is set to 29.97 frames per second, that last number will never go past 29. Once it hits 30, the number column to the left, which is measured in seconds, will change to a 1, while the 29 will reset back to 0. The background color is simply a color backdrop to set all your images against. Depending on graphic or video backgrounds you might be using, you may not even see this color when you're finished with your project. The duration value will determine the length of the composition you're working on. Bear in mind, you may be working with multiple compositions within your After Effects project file. Click OK to establish a new composition with the settings you've designated. If you ever need to change the video settings for a composition, go to the Composition menu and choose Composition Settings. This will reopen the composition settings for the current composition in case you want to make any changes to the composition itself. In this video, we discuss the basics of motion graphics and learn more about some of the technical aspects of video that is important to understand.